my friends. So good to see you. Hope you've had a beautiful week. I know lots of you are finishing school this week. Some may be done, some may have a day or two, but hang in there. You guys have got it, and you are ready for summer. So, hey, we are going to wrap up our unit 2. Does anybody remember what it's called? The Giant Stories of Genesis. Now, it's not all the stories of Genesis, but there's 10. 10 of my favorites that I wanted to make sure you guys know. And they're such big stories, all right? They're stories that lots of people know, lots of people have heard about, and you guys know just a little bit more, don't you? A little bit more than what you knew before we studied this. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope you guys have learned a little bit more each time we've studied. If you missed a story, what can you do? Well, you could call me, yeah. But you know what's even better? Go to the TVC Kids Nashville YouTube page. So you can go back and hear any of the stories that we talked about that you happen to miss. That's been one of the great joys of this time, is that you can go back and you can review and listen to a story you've missed. I've even gone back and said, what did I say about that? All right, let's figure it out. So, hey, last week we reviewed the first 5, and that was creation, Adam and Eve, Noah. You guys remember that story? Yep. We talked about Abraham and Sarah, and then finally Abraham's baby Isaac growing up and finding his wife Rebecca. So that's where we're going to start today. Isaac and Rebecca had 2 babies. Do you guys remember those 2? And the Bible talks about them fighting even inside their mommy's belly. Those 2 brothers did not get along at all. Do you guys remember their names? You got it. It was Jacob and Esau. And Esau was born first. Do you remember him? He was kind of hairy, and he liked to go out and hunt, and he was really a manly kind of guy, right? And Jacob, he was born second, and he liked to cook. He liked to hang out with his mom, and they would spend time together in the tent. He also liked to listen to his dad, Isaac, and his grandpa, Abraham, talk about stories of God. All right. But doing a really fast review on this, Jacob and Esau had something that Jacob wanted. Do you guys remember what that was? The birthright, right? He was born first. So he was given the birthright, and he was going to be able to step into his father's shoes when he passed and take the land and all that encompassed that part. And so Jacob, he was like, but wait, just because I was born a few minutes later, he wanted that birthright. He wanted all that entailed. And you know what? In some ways, Esau, he didn't really care about that too much. At one time, he even traded it for a bowl of something. What was that? A bowl of stew or a bowl of soup. All right, remember we did this one in the kitchen because we were talking about that soup, and he traded his birthright for soup. And then Jacob wanted to get the blessing of that from Isaac. So he snuck into his tent. Do you remember he put on fur from the animals? And he came in and he said, Father, it's your oldest son. But was it? No, it was Jacob. And he fooled his dad into giving him his blessing. So he had the birthright and the blessing, and Esau found out. Was he very happy about that? We're going to hear a lot about brothers not being happy with other brothers in the last part of these stories. But yeah, Esau wasn't so happy, was he? So Rebecca told Jacob, you must run. You must run for your life. Go. And so he left. Never got to see them. Never got to see Isaac again. And so he ran away, and he was out in the middle of the desert. And there he had a dream. If you didn't see this one, this is where we had angels going up a giant ladder because he fell asleep and he had a dream, and God spoke to Jacob in that dream. Remember, Jacob was the one who would listen to the stories of Abraham and Isaac, and God spoke to him, and he showed him there was these angels going up a ladder to heaven, and God spoke down, and he said, Jacob, I am the God of your father Isaac and of your grandfather Abraham, and I will be with you as well. And you will get the lands for as far as you can see. So the promises that God had made to Abraham and Isaac, he was passing those on to Jacob. All right? Even though Jacob, he didn't need to cheat and steal, but he did. But God was there, and he said, you know what? We all make mistakes, right? It's good to hear that even some of the heroes of the Bible have made mistakes. And God was there to pick them up and to continue it on. God had a plan for Jacob the whole way. Did he need to go off? No, but God brought him right back. We talk about that so much in TVC Kids. The plan that God has for you. Sometimes we go off. We sin. We do things wrong. We make mistakes. We get led off by other people. But we could always come back to God's plan. So there was Jacob back on the plan that God had for him. And he got married. He had some sons. We're fast forwarding really, really fast through this for the review. So go back and listen to these stories. But how many sons did he have? Do you guys remember? Was it 1, 2, 5, 10? No, more than I could count on 2 hands. 12 sons. Jacob had 12 sons and 1 daughter. In those 12 sons, there was one that was very special. Now, I'm sitting in the middle of my yard today because I have kind of a favorite part of my yard. Can you see anything in this grass? Can you see any shapes? Yeah. Do you see this star right here? Well, I wish I could say that I was such a good gardener that I planted the clover in that star, but I didn't. Guess what happened? God just put it there. All right? God just chose that little part to be a star of clover. I don't know why, but I sure think it's fun. And you know what? Jacob had a favorite. Just like this is my favorite part of the lawn, Jacob had a favorite son. And who was that? We have this theme of J names going on too. Who was that favorite son? That was Joseph, right? And so just like the star in my yard, the favorite son got something very, very special. And that was a very colorful coat. And those brothers, again, here we are talking about brothers not being so happy with brothers. And it's usually the older brothers not being so happy with the little brothers. Have you noticed that? Yeah, Esau wasn't happy with Jacob. All those older brothers, Joseph only had 1 brother younger, but all those older brothers are like, what? What do you mean he gets this big fancy coat? And then Joseph had dreams. Do you remember those? Where at one time he said there was 11 stars and the sun and the moon and they all bow down to me. Back to our star theme. Joseph was saying, I am the one you're going to bow down to. And then he had a dream about stalks of wheat, little bundles, and 11 of them bowed down to the one. He was like, I'm the wheat, and you're going to bow down to me. Oh, those brothers were not very happy with that. And so they threw him in a pit. They were going to kill him, but they didn't. They threw him in the pit, and then they sold him as a slave. And those Ishmaelites came by and they sold him, and off to Egypt he went. We're zooming through this review so fast, so I hope you guys will go back and listen to these stories again. But here he was in Egypt, and he got sold to be a slave in Potiphar's house. Do you remember the big fancy house? And in there, he was lied about. He did the right thing, and someone said he did the wrong thing, and they threw him in jail. And even in jail, Joseph was listening to God, and he was able to answer dreams. He was kind of like a shining star, wasn't he? Because God was with him. Even in that moment, he said, it's not me. I'm not the one that can answer the dreams. It's my God. God is the one. He was sharing God even in prison. And finally, Pharaoh had a dream. And Jacob was taken up to the big palace where Pharaoh was. And Pharaoh said, I've had this dream, and I've called in all my wisest people, and nobody can answer it. And Joseph said, I can answer it because of my God. And so that's one of my favorite parts of this whole story, is because Joseph was telling Pharaoh, who was in charge of everything. He was the king of kings, right? He was in charge of all these things. And he was telling Pharaoh about the true King of Kings. He was telling Pharaoh about God. All right? So Joseph said, now, here's what your dream means. There's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine where the people won't have anything to eat or food, so you must save up. And he said, put somebody very smart, very wise, very responsible in charge of all of this. And Pharaoh said, I know no one more wise than you and your God. And so he dressed him in fancy clothes and he gave him that very fancy ring. Do you guys remember that? Do you remember that signet ring? And so anytime he would stamp that ring, that meant that he was making the law. So fasting forward, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward, come the years of plenty and the years of famine. And Joseph was there to make sure they saved up. So Egypt was going to be saved because Joseph listened to God, right? We can do great things when we listen to God. All right. And so there they were. And Egypt was saved because of Joseph listening to God. But all the lands around Egypt, they didn't have Joseph there to tell them, right? So they needed food. When they got to that time of famine, they needed food, right? And so who comes to Egypt but Joseph's brother? And remember, those brothers, they looked pretty much the same because they had on their shepherd kind of clothing, but Joseph looked very, very different. He had on gold and fancy clothes and fancy sandals and the fancy ring, and he even rode a chariot as he went by, and the people would bow down to him. What? Bow down to him? Yep. And Joseph's brothers come down, and what do? But they bow down to Joseph. And Joseph, there's a little bit longer story going on here, but Joseph forgave them. And he made sure they had food. And he was able to save his brothers. God, do you see how God was setting that plan moving forward for Joseph? Just like he did Jacob, just like he did Isaac, just like he did Abraham. I love the end of the story of Genesis where it really shows the family of God being set up to be God's kids. Just like that story continues for you and for me. You know, the beginning books of the Bible, they're kind of categorized. They're put in a category called the law, right? And it's like if we could follow these things, if we could learn from these things, learn what a beautiful blessing it is to be in the family of God, and learn that when we obey God and try to stay on that path God has given to us, that he will carry us through. He will save us in all these circumstances. Who knew the kid who was thrown into a pit would later save all of Egypt and save his brothers? Because he obeyed God and listened to God. We can't see what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what's happening. But when we listen to God and obey God, and even like Joseph did, share God, God is going to be there with us. He's going to carry us through. When Jacob was out in that desert, he thought it was it. That was the end. He was all alone. But was he alone? No. He was with God. All right? Just like a lot of us have felt really alone this year. But we weren't alone. We had God. So guys, I hope you'll go through this whole story of Genesis. I hope you have done your Genesis journals and gone back and looked at the questions I put in there for you. They're just so that you could spur on your memory and remember these stories. Because when we remember them, we hang on to the truths that God is teaching us through each of these things. It's going to help us carry through. Will we go off the path sometimes? Yes, we will. I said, you know what? Sometimes the people are just people-y. That's what we are. We're just people-y. Sometimes we go off and we don't do the right things. But we are God's people, and we can always come back to that path. I hope you guys will focus on that this summer. Search the Word of God. Spend time in prayer. Spend time with your parents talking to them about what are the important things to remember. What are the important things to follow God in, right? Obey God, be faithful to God, share God. Those are themes that just run through all of Genesis. I hope you guys have enjoyed going through this book. Next week, we're going to start a whole new study. It's called Great Guys and Gals for God. So we're going to learn about a lot of people. Girls, you might want to make sure you watch next week. All right, you guys, I love you. I hope you have a great week, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.